So we've had such a rich morning already, and it's now going to get richer. It is my great joy to introduce Philip Lindsay. You know, how many of you received the Esoteric Astrologer newsletter? Yeah, it's so good. You get it every month, and he just goes into all the cultural and historical and political goings-on that have to do with every sign that we are entering, and just so worth your time. So go sign up for it if you don't get it already. And actually, right now in the bookstore, he has a new book that is Soul Cycles 2, which has the newsletters from the past 2 years, which I want to buy because I like books. And not just online. And he also has a new book in the bookstore, Destiny, Races, and Nations 2, which is his last 5 years of writing. Philip is prolific. Do you ever, I mean, I don't know. It's so many. I was sitting at my desk the other day reading one of his books, just thinking, this is one of, how many? 15 or something. It's beautiful. Also, I just want to mention about Philip that he is involved in a project now called the Hidden History of Humanity Project that has been and will be a life's work. And on the website, the Hidden History of Humanity website, he describes it like this. It's finding the proofs, geographical, biological, astrological, that corroborate the given esoteric theory related to the history of the root races. It's ultimately about the birth of the human soul and its ongoing evolutionary unfoldment of consciousness. And he is traveling around the world, and he's getting gorgeous videos, and he's working with Justin also to build beautiful video project, and it's very exciting. So, you know, support this if you can. He has donation possibilities on his website. It's incredibly exciting. I want to welcome our friend, Philip Lindsay.
Thanks, Sadi. Just a minute. A few tangled of wires here. We switched over, Bob? Okay. Well, hi everyone. Nice to see you all. Thank you, Heidi, for your very generous introduction. It's always great to be here, to be back with the family in a sense. Actually, I have a few entities to thank. Transing Saturn, Michael Robbins, and my soul were all involved in the conspiracy to get me here to this conference. And fate does work in mysterious ways, I must say. This USR conference is always a focused meditation that goes on for a couple of months beforehand. And it creates many opportunities on the inner planes, I think. And this year it culminates just before the Taurus full moon. So at that period we can extract the sattvas, if you like, from this past 2 months of meditation and focus as we work towards this point of the USR annual conference. And we can offer this up to the hierarchy, in a sense, at the Taurus full moon, the Wesak festival, arguably the most important festival of each spiritual year. And I think our generation of esotericists have the opportunity as a group in this cycle to strike a blow upon the mental plane and leave our mark. We can visualize this process by seeing ourselves dressed like smithies in our work aprons, gathered around the anvil in a circle with our hammers swinging onto the anvil, and transforming the raw material into something that is beautiful and useful. Perhaps this relates to shaping our ideas and the ageless wisdom into thought forms that can be accessed by a steadily awakening humanity. So, 2012 is quite an historical nexus point, and we are here. After all the hype and talk in the last 20 years about 2012, now it's here. And I've presented things about this before and have written about it on my website and in some books and so forth, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that today. But I am glad for the opportunity to give this astro-historical perspective, because in many ways the work that I do on the Hidden History of Humanity project is tailor-made for offering this view on the fifth ray. We are in the fifth root race and the culmination of the fifth root race. So what I'm going to offer today is, and in the workshop this afternoon, is similar to other presentations, but it's actually offering a different perspective and hopefully shedding more light on what I've given before. I'm not giving all the same stuff as I've given before, but you will recognize some familiar keywords and ideas. So hopefully I can provide a large view structure that we can put into our understanding a whole bunch of other stuff that's going to be presented at this conference in the next few days. My first heading here is the fifth ray is everything. And actually it went and changed itself there. Let me just get, and there I was going to go to that and it went to by itself. There you go. The fifth ray in this fifth root race is bringing the fifth kingdom of souls into manifestation. This is my mantra, in a sense, for this talk. So let us get a few basic facts to enumerate as we work from the macrocosm to the microcosm in tracing the descent of energy. We live in a period that is seeing the culmination of this fifth ray, in this fifth root race, in this fifth sub-race, in this fifth branch race. And when we sit down and really contemplate cosmically, the fifth ray is everywhere. If we look at Sirius, we see it as the highest self of this solar system, polarized on the fifth cosmic mental plane. We see the second aspect of Sirius. Sirius is like the second aspect of a triangle involving the Pleiades and the Great Bear. And that triangle is the major conditioning astrological triangle for this planet. So it has very much a fifth aspect, second aspect to it. And when the Sirian forces arrive at our level of the cosmic physical plane, we call it love wisdom. So we can see how Sirius is the highest self to this solar system, and Venus is the highest self to our Earth, and therefore Sirius and Venus are intimately linked to one another. So we have this development of love and mind that is inextricably linked to one another. And the eventual synthesis of heart and head is reflected in the expression of compassionate understanding. Platitudes to some of us, but worth reiterating, I think. We'll come back to this theory of Sirius and Venus a little bit later. We can also perceive these 7-ray frequencies through colour. Most of you are familiar with these colour wheels. And of course the fifth ray is the orange ray, always opposite the indigo ray, the second ray of love wisdom, the fifth ray of concrete science. Fifth ray, second ray, orange, indigo blue. No doubt some of our artists that are here present at the conference this year will have a lot more to say about that. So colours are of course one key to the rays. And one of the names for human souls is the lions, the divine and tawny orange flames. And when these lions came into individualization, the human kingdom was born. And these lions, or Leo, rule the triangle of the Sun and Jupiter, both second-ray planets, and Venus, the fifth ray. So we have the fifth sign, Leo, the fifth ray, that pours through Leo, and that ray is ruled by Venus. Venus, the higher self of the Earth, while Sirius, the higher self of the solar system. Venus is known exoterically as love and wisdom, and esoterically the force which reconciles the pairs of opposites upon the mental plane. And it's a very magical manifesting energy. One of its symbols is the five-pointed star, the pentagram. It hints at the magical work of manifestation of the fifth ray, especially when working with the seventh ray of ceremonial order or magic, ruled by Uranus. And so we utilize these forces in affecting the true white magic. Pre-individualization was instigated by, of course, as we know, the Lords of Flame, who came from the Venus chain of the Earth scheme. Not Venus per se, but the Venus chain. And here we have a diagram of the Earth scheme and the Earth chain here and the Venus chain here. So these were great lives that lived within the Earth scheme, and they were stimulated by what was occurring on the planet Venus, or the Venus scheme, through the fact that the experiment of initiation was tried on Venus, and they finished their evolution within 5 rounds instead of 7 rounds. So that allowed individualization to be that created a doorway, if you like, for energy to flow through and for individualization to occur here on this planet. Individualization. Counting esoterically or backward, the fifth ray is also the third ray, just as the fifth plane is the third plane. It's very important to understand the counting backwards or forwards of these planes, because they are related in quite a deep way. The third ray is the mother ray, one of the 3 rays of aspect, and the ray of mind that births the fifth ray. And so here I just have the fifth ray with Venus, and of course counting backwards it's the third ray. So this is important to bear in mind, because I'm going to talk about the third root race, which actually isn't Lemuria, but this root race that we're in now. So the Kingdom of Souls came into being about 21 million years ago in Lemuria, and we call that the third root race, the first physical race with bones, if you like. The presence of the great Chimeras from the Venus chain of the Earth scheme, their combined mental energies created a vast electrical storm, which I've mentioned before in my talks, that destroyed most of the animal kingdom, of whom the primitive future humans were members. This storm was the fire of manners or mind. And this period was the true epoch for the death of the dinosaurs and the birth of the human kingdom. DK tells us the spark of mind was implanted, and the strength of its vibration and the immediate effect of its presence caused the death of the animal form, thus producing the immediate possibility of the newly vitalized causal bodies vibrating to such purpose that new physical vehicles were taken. I've read that passage many times because it's profound. That's not all of it, that's just part of the passage actually. So each animal man was loaned a causal body or soul. The monads of each future human appropriated an individual solar angel to guide it through evolution. And of course this was a huge sacrifice by these angels who had perfected themselves in a previous evolution. And also a great mystery. The angelic beings had been humans in a previous solar system. They were solar angels from the sun. Sirius is the higher self to the sun. Therefore the sun, or the solar logos, is an incarnation of Sirius. And this may explain why the majority of humanity, when they have liberated themselves, will choose the fourth cosmic path, the Sirian path. So currently Earth plays a fairly important part in this greater relationship that exists between Sirius and this solar system. Now, the individualization process lasted approximately 3 million years, from about 21 million years ago to about 18 million years ago. And bear in mind that the 5 is the 3 and the 3 is the 5, depending upon how we count. You'll notice that the individualization process finished in the 5th subrace, which also coincided with the process of sexual separation from the hitherto hermaphrodite humanity. And here we see the cleaving nature, if you like, of the 5th ray. It actually created a separation of the human form into 2 genders, and as well, of course, as the 5th ray and the consciousness that was imbued, or the germ of mentality, as DK calls it, the spark of mind in humanity. So this emphasizes the difference between the races, the race that we're in now and the Lemurian race. The Lemurian race was polarized in the sacral center, and this race is working towards a polarization in the throat center. The soul is upon the mental plane. Its home is upon the mental plane. Why? The mental plane is a unifying principle of intelligence where spirit can marry matter. At individualization, the germ of mentality, or spark of mind, was sufficiently implanted so that the descending spirit could judge the time as being ripe and to take possession of the lower vehicles. So what actually happened? Well, here we have a diagram of the planes, which most of you are familiar with. The mental plane here between these 2 arrows. The higher mental plane, the upper 3 subplanes, and these lords of flame that came to implant the spark of mind in humanity effected a transfer from the lowest point of the triad, the mental permanent atom here, to the lowest atom of the personality, the physical permanent atom. And they could only reach as far as the 3rd subplane of the mental plane. And this is where the causal body was formed. This is the moment of individualization on the 3rd subplane of the mental plane, the home of the soul, the causal body. So the 5th mental plane is the home of the soul. The 5th ray corresponds to the 5th kingdom, the kingdom of souls. And of course, Venus and the sign of Gemini and the 5th ray all brought individualization and the 4th human kingdom. But now Venus and the 5th ray, and probably Gemini again, are going to help bring about the 5th kingdom of souls in this 5th root race as we move into the 6th root race. We are on the cusp or verge of a true flowering. Now I have a bunch of stuff here about Venus and Mercury, which I think I'll save for this afternoon's workshop. Suffice to say, Michael touched on a few things about Mercury and the 5th ray and its connection to the mind. But I just want to show you a simple diagram here of the 3 major root races and how, in a sense, we had been on the descending arc from Lemuria individualization down to the Atlantean root race, where there was the deepest incarnation into matter for the race, and then the rising back up the scale towards the Aryan, or the 5th root race. And we have moved from individualization to initiation in this period. Conscious initiation, far more conscious than ever before. We can look at it this way, the individualization by the time, mostly for most humans, by the 5th subrace of the 3rd root race, the birth of the human kingdom, and of course the same subrace of Atlantis, the 4.5, was another crisis just before the 5th root race, just after the Atlantean War and floods and so forth. And now we find ourselves here, the 555. going into the 556 with the latest branch race, of course, and the birth of the kingdom of souls, which is going to really accelerate and gather pace as this 2,000-year cycle of Aquarius unfolds, but also as the greater cycle of Aquarius, the 25,000-year cycle, unfolds at the same time. And this is an unprecedented cycle in history that has only occurred. This is the 7th time it's occurred in the history of the 5th root race. So these words, quintessential, the word meaning 5, quin, 5th branch race, 5th subrace, 5th root race. And this 5th branch race started about 16,000 years ago on my calculations. I have here in this diagram that the inception of the 5th root race was about 4 million years ago, at the time of the Atlantean flood. But the actual manifestation or materialization of that race was in India about 1 million years ago. And the 5th subrace of that race, in far northern Europe, was about 100,000 years ago. And this 5th branch race, about 16,000 years ago, with about 10,000 years to go. Branch races generally follow about a 25,000 year cycle. So the 5th branch race crowns the evolution of the 5th root race. That's when our crowning glory, if you like, is going to happen. And we are in the middle of that period now. And even though we're in that middle of that period now, the seeds are germinating for the next root race. And I have a little bit more to say about that in a minute. So with this number 5, the 5th root race, this great culmination that's occurring in human history, we can think of some of the things that H.P.B. Blavatsky said about great souls like Confucius and Plato being 5th rounders. They were like seeds that were way ahead of the stream that were serving the race in the finale, if you like, of the 5th root race. Of course, the 5th round hasn't started yet, or has it? Because you could say that in this 4th round, at the peak culmination of the 5th root race, that the 5th round has actually already started. Because the rounds, just like the root races and all cycles, all overlap each other. So there could be an argument given for the fact that the 5th round has been seeded and is pretty much starting, but the 4th round is only halfway through. It still has a long way to go. But the 5th round is going to pick up speed in parallel while that 4th round winds down in its cycle. It's just an idea anyway. It's not written in concrete yet, but it's a theory I have. Plato, of course, was like a mini Avatar or mini Manu who set the type for the 5th branch race in terms of certain laws, history of Atlantis, and many of the foundations for our modern Europe actually lay back in that time of ancient Greece and Crete and so forth. It's interesting to note that the master of the 5th ray, the master Hilarion, has his home on Crete. So that area, I think, there was a wonderful seeding of philosophers and thinkers, and they gradually gathered together over the last 16,000 years and created a foundation for what we know now as modern Europe. Of course, around that time, about 10,000 years ago, existed the being we call Orpheus, who held the office of the Christ at that particular time. And of course, Pythagoras, an incarnation of the master Kuthumi, very much connected with the Orphic teachings. And Michael mentioned Patanjali last night, I think, and he also was in the same era, around about 10,000 years ago. Maybe there were other Patanjalis before him, but he also gave us a manual for liberation in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. One of my favourite books. Okay. Now, the root races can, as I said before, can be counted differently. So here we have the 333, the 444, the 555, one of my favourite mantras, and Lemuria, Atlantis, the RN, or the fifth root race period, the time scales, the approximate time scales, the approximate initiations associated with the physical plane, the emotional plane, and the mental plane, the first, second, and third degrees. Generically, these root races represent those degrees. But instead of calling them the third, fourth, and fifth, the 1, 2, and 3 could be assigned to them as well, because this is the first time in Lemuria that humans came into conscious being and consciousness in bodies, solar and lunar angels united. So in this respect then, we are in the third root race at the moment. And the third ray of active intelligence has a lot to do with bringing this third root race to fruition, to maturity, to culmination, to efflorescence. So this is now. And imminent, there is a great harvest of souls ripening who will take the third degree possibly in the next 500, 700 years in the first decade of the sign of Aquarius, establishing what DK calls a great station of light upon the planet. And so I think there's a great possibility that at this particular peak, a significant proportion of the human population of the fifth root race will take the third degree, have the opportunity to take the third degree anyway. Perhaps, not so much necessarily in physical numbers, but a critical mass in consciousness. And these will be the disciples and initiates who will be the seed of the sixth root race. They will be the leaders and initiates and guides and so forth of the coming race, which is going to be unfolding in the next 25,000 years. So, if we look at the last 600 years, we see an incredible acceleration of this third aspect, third ray, fifth ray quality. Again, just to finish off on the last theme, we see the spiral of consciousness here. A long time for the development of the Lemurian consciousness, a slightly shorter time for Atlantean consciousness, and now the Aryan consciousness, the third root race, is reaching the point of the spiral. I was lucky enough to find a little Christmas star there for the top of that one. this illumination and bursting out of light. So this past 600 years represents the apex of the spiral of evolution for the fifth branch race, bringing into alignment the completion of the fifth sub-race and the fifth root race. And although the fifth branch race has a ways to go, it doesn't have to run out its full course. The work has been done; it's almost completed, and I think we're going to see the apotheosis of the fifth root race in the next few thousand years. Well, we're seeing it now already, really. Okay, so this alignment of the 555, the fifth root race, also set in motion the destructive cycle of the Kali Yuga, which started around about 3100 BC. And so we have the fifth root race is actually in decline. It is going in, it's in its destructive destroyer phase. But there is an emerging parallel Satya Yuga cycle, or the golden age, that is actually emerging, and that is the golden age of the sixth root race. But we're not going to see much more of that for the next 25,000 years. The sattvas and seeds of this fifth root race development so far will be extracted to plant for the coming race and lie hidden in the not quite ripe fruit of the fifth root race tree. Now, why did that go to that? Oh yes, I need to go to here. This is a table of the various ray energies that we've been influenced by in the last 600 or so years. I'm going to go into this in much more detail this afternoon. I'm just going to touch upon it this morning to illustrate the major influences that have brought this incredible acceleration of mind and consciousness in the last 600 years. And the main one I identify as the Ray 3 of active intelligence and its cycle that started in 1425 and is still going. It has various inward and outward phases, but it coincided with the European Renaissance. And of course, much of the golden age of Greece came through the European Renaissance, and the same kind of souls, or these same souls and so forth, that guided and set us up for the last 600 years, pretty much. So invention of printing spread to the dissemination of ideas and so forth. Then we had the Age of Enlightenment, the so-called Age of Enlightenment, cultural movement of intellectuals to reform society and so forth. And I have some of these ray influences down the side here. But the main ray that I identify within this third ray cycle is the fifth ray that pretty much kick-started the Industrial Revolution, the technological revolution, the communications and computer revolutions and so forth, and which had a very short incarnation. It was withdrawn by order of Sanat Kumara and the Fifth Ray Lord. I'd love to have been at that meeting that those two had. And I calculate that it went out pretty much in the late 90s, from the time that DK wrote the piece about it. But we're going into the age of Aquarius, which has the fifth ray, is the only ray that comes through it on the larger and lesser cycles. And whether that fifth ray is an incarnation or not, it will naturally be invoked by nature of the sign Aquarius. So let's see now. How much time we got left? 10 minutes, okay. So I'm going to skip all these ray cycles this morning and examine them more in depth this afternoon. There's some very interesting stuff that's going on. There's the third ray, the fifth ray, the seventh ray, and the first ray, all the rays along the ray line of mind that are very powerful. But this afternoon I do talk about the second ray and the sixth ray. In fact, the experiment by hierarchy to try and offset the excesses of the industrial age by bringing in the poets and the musicians and so forth. And DK says somewhere that experiment was a failure because humanity failed to respond to the more second-rate qualities of the Romantic poets, for instance. We can explore that in more detail this afternoon, I hope. We had poets such as Blake, of course, talking about those dark satanic mills, and this is one person's version of that. I think it looks like London and the Thames River there, back in the 1700s. And of course we had very powerful second-ray writers like Charles Dickens, who also talked about that. Have we got rain? Whoa! The drought has broken. Beautiful. So this was the collateral damage, if you like, to use that odious word, that phrase, of the fifth ray age, but we actually did need it in some ways, in many ways, because it pulled us out of our more Piscean sixth ray mystical consciousness that was more about belief and superstition, a lot of the glamour of the sixth ray. I'll talk about the first ray this afternoon in terms of Britain and Germany involved in this whole industrial revolution in Europe. So we'll skip that for now. And I'm going to go into talking about the discovery of Uranus as well, only a few years after the fifth ray cycle started. 1775, the fifth ray cycle started, but in 1781, Uranus was discovered, and of course we have the French and American revolutions either side of these dates, which is just amazing. So we'll come back, we'll examine this double Aquarian cycle this afternoon. But what I want to get to now is the dweller. What is the dweller of the fifth root race? This Vulcan that is forged. I'm going to find another picture just to leave it on for now. What is stopping the kingdom of souls from manifesting? Mind without heart, separativeness, cruelty, pride, the three heads of the Hydra and Scorpio. the God complex, an unshakable belief characterized by consistently inflated feelings of personal ability, privilege, and infallibility in all areas of life. And in this fifth root race, we have become arrogant and prideful in the development of mind. This is the shadow, this is our shadow that we must confront, and we are in the middle of confronting it. World Wars I and II were the first phase, I think, of facing that dweller, and in a sense, World War III is already happening on the mental plane, and we're still working this stuff out. I think the conflict between the world dweller, or the fifth root race dweller, and the angel is actually focused in the USA, it being a leading nation of the fifth root race that will catapult us into the sixth root race. So science has brought the fifth root race to maturity, to the threshold of initiation, yet we must face our dweller first. We think that we can play God and manipulate nature's laws to our whims. We have a bit of a mad scientist syndrome going on. We could even call it the Nazi mind in some respects, a kind of a mind unalloyed with mercy. We can see the dweller as embodying a cold mental acuity, unalloyed with love or wisdom. So, yet the fifth and second rays are intimately linked. The second ray of love, wisdom, and the fifth ray of science. But there is an imbalance in their expression. For example, even though the quest for discovery is wonderful in terms of, say, for instance, the space program, it's at the expense of compassionate social issues and health, in terms of the money that's spent on that kind of thing. So part of science's dweller is the glamour of authority. Science that serves the few and not the many. Science that sells itself out to big business, like biotech companies, big pharmacy, big farm, genetically modified foods and so forth. Frankenscience, the utter disregard for the environment, etc., etc. I'm preaching to the choir and all that, I'm sure. And pollution, of course, is one of these the great shadows of the onward rush of science. It's gone into developing all this technology, but has actually not regarded the side effects. And we're just starting to come to terms and far greater consciousness with all that. Just like to read out to you 8 points that concern the fifth ray in science. No, I won't. I'm going to skip that. I'll leave it till this afternoon. I'll spare that. Is it 6 minutes or more? Okay. Exoteric and esoteric science. When exoteric science is at its wit's end, esotericism starts. Esotericism is the area that exoteric science cannot explain. Exoteric science deals with that which is tangible, has already emerged. Esoteric science deals with the intangible and what may emerge. Esoteric science embraces all sciences, however. Therefore, we must determine and dictate or guide, it must determine or dictate and guide exoteric science. It must embrace all sciences. The key impasse between the exoteric and esoteric sciences centre on the difference between subtle impression and the outer five tangible senses. In this regard, modern science seems to have become even more materialistic. Looking at what's going on now, there's two sides to the story, and I'm going to try and illustrate both of them. Scientific materialism has hardened into a kind of anti-Christian faith. I'm quoting here somebody who is referring to people like Richard Dawkins. An ideology rather than a scientific principle, claiming authority to dictate theories and to veto inquiries on topics that don't suit it, such as unorthodox medicine, let alone religion. There's a current attempt to belittle and ban homeopathy, which seems to come round cyclically every so often. The esoteric author, Rupert Sheldrake, says in his latest book called The Science Delusion, as opposed to the God Delusion by Hawkins, is the current popular confidence. He says that the science delusion is the current popular confidence in certain fixed assumptions, the exaltation of today's science not as the busy, constantly changing workshop that it actually is, but as a final, infallible oracle preaching a crude kind of materialism. Research conventions are tailored to smooth out data, obscuring wide variations by averaging many results. Scientists readily accept results that fit in with their conception of eternal laws or funding. Yet scientists are the few who have been trained. Their findings are made through precise demonstration, and they transform it for practical use. Look at all the millions of things that have been created in the last 200 years. Exoteric science has a capacity to demonstrate all esoteric sciences in a concrete way. A computer exists because it reproduces what the brain does. The X-ray has a capacity to see through, etc., etc. Einstein, of course, penetrated the fourth ether with his theory of relativity. That was only really proved decades later by lots of experiments by different other people. So we must formulate a universal and unified esoteric science, one that works alongside with the scientific method rather than belittling or rejecting it, yet acknowledging its shortcomings or undue dominance. Such a universal system of esotericism would constitute a wider framework into which more specialised aspects of human knowledge in all its facets could be placed. Esoteric science's key responsibility is to teach, I think, is to teach and bridge about the subtle worlds and what originates there from the mind, thought, rain cloud of knowable things. And in that respect, I'd like to just finish with a few quotes from the Master DK about this. Some years ago, I told you that the new era, too, would be ushered in by the scientists of the world, and that the inauguration of the kingdom of God on earth would be heralded by means of successful scientific investigation. By the first step in the releasing of the energy of the atom, this has been accomplished. Then he says, this recognition by science that all forms are built of intelligent lives will come about when the science of magic begins again to come to the fore, and when the laws of being are better understood. Magic concerns itself with the manipulation of the lesser lives by a greater life. When the scientist begins to work with the consciousness that animates substance, atomic or electronic, and when he brings under his conscious control the forms built of this substance, he will gradually become cognizant of the fact that all entities of all grades and of varying constitutions go to the construction of that which is seen. And you can find several quotes of DK similar to this in the blue books. This will not be until science has definitely admitted the existence of etheric matter as understood by the occultist, and until it has developed the hypothesis that this ether is in differing vibrations. When the etheric counterpart of all that exists is allocated to its rightful place and known to be of more importance in the scale of being than the dense vehicle, being essentially the body of the life or vitality, then the role of the scientist and the occultist will merge. Thank you very much.